This happened to me in the summer of 2018, on the 4th of July. I was 19 at the time, living with my parents for the summer before heading back to school. We lived in San Bernardino County, Southern California, a quiet suburb. Nothing too exciting ever really happened there. Every year, our family hosted a small backyard barbecue. Burgers, fireworks, neighbors dropping by, that kind of thing. It was never huge, but it was always noisy and fun. That year, we had about 15 or 20 people show up. Kids ran around with sparklers, music blasted from a Bluetooth speaker, and our next-door neighbors were setting off bottle rockets right in the street. The sky was lit up almost constantly, red and blue flashes from every direction. In the distance, you could hear the big fireworks show downtown, echoing off the hills like distant thunder. It was one of those nights that felt perfect. The air was warm, thick with the smell of charcoal, sunscreen, and bug spray. You could almost forget the world outside existed. But around 11 o'clock, things started to wind down. Most of the guests said their goodbyes. My parents went to bed. The music stopped. The street got quiet. I was still a little wired from all the energy, so I stayed outside on the patio for a while. Just me, a folding chair, and my phone. I scrolled for a bit, watched a couple stories, sipped on a beer I'd stashed in the fridge earlier. Everything was still. The only sound was the occasional pop of a leftover firecracker somewhere in the neighborhood. I remember this part clearly. I had just turned off my screen and leaned back to look at the stars. That's when I heard it. A sound behind the fence. Not a bang, not a crack, something softer. A rustling like dry leaves being stepped on. Now, our backyard backs up to a slope. And behind that, a small wooded strip of land that separates our neighborhood from the next. No sidewalks, no trails. It's basically unused land, overgrown and quiet. So hearing someone, or something, back there made my stomach drop. I sat up and listened. At first, I told myself it was probably just a raccoon, or maybe one of the neighbor's dogs got loose. But then I heard it again, this time clearer. A slow, deliberate crunch, leaves and grass underfoot. Then, breathing. Not heavy or panicked, just soft, steady breathing. I stood up, stepped off the patio, and stared into the darkness beyond the fence. I couldn't see anything. It was pitch black back there. No streetlights, no backyard lights from the other side. I said something, just a soft, hello? And that's when I heard it, a whisper. Calm, raspy, and too close. It said, I saw you watching me. I didn't move. My heart was pounding, but my body wouldn't respond. I just stood there trying to figure out what I had just heard. It wasn't threatening. It wasn't angry. But that made it worse somehow. I backed up slowly, step by step, toward the sliding door. Then I heard the voice again, even softer now. Don't go inside. That snapped something in me. I turned, ran into the house, slammed the doors shut and locked it. I yanked the curtains closed and turned off every light I could reach. I ended up sitting on the kitchen floor, hidden behind the counter, holding my phone in one hand and a kitchen knife in the other. I didn't call the police. I should have, but I didn't. Maybe I was afraid they wouldn't find anything, or worse, that they would. I sat there until the sun came up. At around 6:30 in the morning, I finally worked up the nerve to check the backyard. Nothing was out of place. The patio was clean. The gate was still locked. But when I walked to the back fence and peeked over, I saw it. 2 bare footprints in the dirt, side by side, facing my house. No trail, no steps leading away. Just those 2 prints, like someone had stood there and watched. We filed a police report that afternoon. Officers came, looked around, but didn't find much. No prints, no damage. No one on any security footage from nearby homes. My dad installed a motion sensor light and a Ring camera the next day. But whoever, or whatever, was out there that night never came back. Or if they did, they were smart enough to stay out of sight. It's been years now. I live in a different city, different life. But every 4th of July, when the fireworks start and the backyard goes quiet, I think about that voice again. Calm, close, just behind the fence. Don't go inside. This happened to me and my family back in 2006, on the 4th of July. I was 12 years old at the time, and we were spending the weekend at my uncle's lake house in Maine. It was a small, 2-story cabin tucked between trees on the north side of the water, quiet, remote, and surrounded by other families who'd come up for the holiday weekend. The lake itself was big, maybe a mile across at its widest point, with a handful of houses scattered around the far shoreline. You could sit on the deck and see everything clearly, even at night. Reflections danced across the surface like ripples of fire and color. That year, the 4th landed on a Tuesday, and most people were already celebrating by the weekend. We got there Sunday evening, and by Monday, the lake was buzzing. Boats cruised by with lights strung along their railings. Kids screamed from floating tubes. Music drifted in from all directions. It was the kind of chaos that only feels peaceful when you're tucked far enough away from it. The 4th itself was no different. People were already setting up chairs before sunset, prepping for the fireworks. My uncle grilled. My parents laughed and drank. And I hung out with my cousin Josh, who was about my age. We were inseparable during those lake trips. As the fireworks kicked off, Josh and I went down to the dock. The lake was glowing, streaks of red, white, and blue lighting up the water. Every time something exploded in the sky, it felt like the whole lake held its breath for a second. Our parents were behind us on the porch, talking over the music, but we weren't listening. Josh nudged me and pointed, "Dude, look at that roof." At first, I didn't see anything. But then, right in the middle of the far shoreline, standing on the roof of a dimly lit cabin, I saw it. A person, just standing, not celebrating, not holding a sparkler, not looking at the fireworks, just standing. They weren't facing the sky. They weren't moving. They were staring across the water, directly at us. I remember squinting, trying to see more detail, but it was just a silhouette, perfectly still, perfectly out of place. I called my mom over. She glanced across the lake, shrugged, and said it was probably just some drunk teenager goofing off. But we kept watching. 10 minutes passed, then 20, and that figure never moved, not an inch. At one point, I muttered, "They're still there." And Josh whispered back, "I don't think they've even blinked." I know it doesn't sound like much. A person standing on a roof isn't exactly headline material. But there was something off about it. Like, they weren't just watching the lake. They were watching us. Specifically, it was a presence, not a person. At least, that's how it felt. Eventually, the fireworks ended. People clapped, shouted, packed up their chairs. Our parents went inside. Josh and I lingered, scanning the far shoreline one last time. The roof was empty. The silhouette gone. We didn't talk much after that. Just went inside, put on a movie, and passed out on the pull-out couch. I remember trying to convince myself it was just a trick of the light, maybe a vent pipe or a flagpole. But even then, I knew that was a lie. The next morning, my uncle went out early, like he always did, and took his kayak out for a lap around the lake. When he got back, he looked confused, maybe even a little disturbed. He said he paddled across to the cabin we'd seen, the one with the person on the roof. He figured he'd say hello or see if they wanted to grab breakfast at the general store like some neighbors do. But the place looked completely abandoned. There was no car in the driveway, no boat, no signs of life. He said the windows were covered with sheets of plastic. Not curtains, just plastic, duct-taped from the inside. And when he peeked through one of the gaps, the place was empty. Like, completely empty. No furniture, no lights, no boxes, nothing. He knocked a few times, walked around back. That's when he noticed something on the roof. A black mark, like something had been burned there. He said it looked almost like a scorch mark, but oddly specific. It wasn't a patch or a streak. It was the shape of a hand, just a single open handprint, pressed into the shingles, charred into the surface. My uncle shook his head, laughed it off. Probably a firework, he said, or a prank. Something weird but harmless. But Josh and I knew better. We saw someone standing on that roof. We watched them stand there, motionless, for almost half an hour. And we both felt the same thing, that we weren't supposed to notice them, like they were staring through us, not at us. We've gone back to that lake house a few times since then, summer after summer. The cabin across the water is still there, still dark, still empty. And every 4th of July, when the fireworks start again, we always find ourselves standing on the dock, watching just to see if they'll come back. This happened to me and a friend back in 1999, on the night of the 4th of July. I haven't told many people because it sounds like something straight out of a horror movie. And honestly, even after all these years, I still don't fully understand what we saw. I was 17 at the time. My friend Chris had just gotten his license and borrowed his dad's car for the night. We were going to a fireworks party a few towns over. Nothing crazy. Just music, food, maybe catch up with some people from school. The plan was simple. Go, watch the show, then head home before midnight. We left the party around 11:45. I remember the time because Chris's mom texted him just before we got into the car, asking if we were on the way back. We got on Route 97, a long, quiet highway that cuts through the middle of Central Oregon. That night, it was pitch black. No streetlights, barely any cars, just trees on both sides and the low hum of the radio. For the first 20 minutes, everything felt normal. Then, just after midnight, the radio went out, not to silence, just that soft, eerie static, like wind mixed with a faint, distant whine. We tried switching stations, but nothing came through. Every channel was the same. At first, we joked about it. Chris made a crack about creepy road energy, and I laughed. But deep down, something about it didn't sit right. You know that weird tension you feel when everything seems normal, but your brain keeps whispering something's wrong? That's when we saw him. A man walking along the shoulder, heading in the same direction we were driving. He came into view suddenly, like he'd just materialized out of the darkness. He was shirtless, barefoot. His jeans were soaked from the knees down. Chris slowed down, glanced at me and said, "Should we stop?" I nodded. "Yeah, I guess." He pulled up beside the guy and rolled down the window a few inches. "Hey man, you all right?" The guy didn't answer. He just stood there, staring off down the road. Then, slowly, he turned his head toward us. His eyes looked wrong, bloodshot, vacant, like he hadn't slept in days. He looked like someone halfway between a panic attack and complete numbness. Then he said it. He looked directly at me and said, "Turn around. It's not safe ahead." Then he turned and walked off the road, not down the shoulder, not toward any visible path, just straight into the trees, vanishing into the dark. Chris and I sat there for a few seconds in stunned silence. "What the hell did that mean?" he finally asked. I didn't have an answer. We kept driving, slower this time. Maybe 2 miles later, we saw the flashing lights, red and blue bouncing off the trees like warning signals. As we got closer, we saw what had happened. A red SUV had veered off the road and hit a tree. The front end was smashed in. The roof looked like it had buckled. One of the tires was still spinning. It couldn't have happened more than a few minutes before we got there. Police were already on the scene. EMTs were working fast. A trooper motioned for us to stop while they cleared the area. Another officer walked up to Chris's window and asked if we'd seen anything unusual. We told him about the man we passed, gave as much detail as we could. Shirtless, barefoot, wet jeans, glassy-eyed. As soon as we described him, the officer's expression changed. "You said 2 miles back?" he asked. We nodded. He lowered his voice and said, "That matches the passenger, the one who didn't survive." I blinked. "Wait, he died?" The officer nodded. "Instantly. We think he was ejected. He didn't make it." Chris and I stared at each other. I asked the officer, "Are you sure?" Because we saw him. He was walking. He talked to us. The officer didn't answer right away. He looked uncomfortable, like he didn't know what to say. Then he said, "Just be careful driving the rest of the way," and walked off. We didn't speak for the rest of the drive home. I've replayed that night in my head more times than I can count. The man's face, his voice, that warning. Turn around. It's not safe ahead. It wasn't panic. It wasn't even emotion. It was like he knew something we didn't. Like he had already seen what was coming. And if we had kept driving a little faster, if we hadn't stopped, maybe that SUV wouldn't have been the only wreck on that road. Was it a ghost? A glitch in time? I don't know. But I believe, whatever that was, it was trying to save us. And maybe it did.